guys, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we discuss a different true crime case. I'm Elisa Bird Hill, and this week we are going to be talking about Jamie Lee Peterson. I realized in researching this case just how common the name Jamie Lee is. Obviously, we have actress, scream queen Jamie Lee Curtis. I had a good friend in school whose name was Jamie Lee. I think there was actually a couple of Jamie Lees at my school. So, very, very common name. With that being said, we can go ahead and jump right in. On the morning of Sunday, October 6, 1996, Geraldine Montgomery didn't show up for church. Geraldine was 68 years old, 4'11", and weighed about 110 pounds. She also lived alone. She was a retired teacher's aide and was said to be a pillar of her community. When she missed church that Sunday, her friends became concerned and went to her house looking for her. They found her house to be ransacked and immediately called the police. Once there, the officers found Geraldine in the trunk of her own car, deceased, fully clothed but asphyxiated. The car was parked in the garage, running, but the garage door was closed. An autopsy was ordered, which showed that Geraldine had been badly beaten. It also revealed that she had been put into the trunk of the car alive and left to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Due to a semen stain on her shirt that was mixed with her own saliva, police suspected that Geraldine had been sexually assaulted. During the autopsy, a vaginal swab was performed, confirming the presence of semen and that she had been raped both vaginally and orally. The spot on her shirt was too small to get a sample of. However, they were able to get a DNA profile from the vaginal swab. At the time, there were no matches found. Because of this, the crime went unsolved for about 4 months, until someone confessed. In February of 1997, an inmate came forward to say that another fellow inmate had confessed to him that he had committed the crime. That inmate was 22-year-old Jamie Lee Peterson. He was in the jail awaiting trial for the statutory rape of a 15-year-old girl. Police questioned Peterson and gave him a polygraph, which he failed. After failing the polygraph, Peterson went on to confess in detail to the rape and murder of Geraldine. He said he took $80 and a candle from the victim's home. Of course, officers also collected DNA from him at this time. A little bit about Jamie Lee Peterson. By the time he was 22, Peterson had spent years in a mental health facility, or back then it would have been called an asylum. He was considered brain damaged and mentally ill. It is assumed his IQ was very low, which I cannot help but be reminded of Brendan Dassey talking about this, especially with what's about to come up. If you're not familiar, Brendan Dassey is the nephew of Stephen Avery, who confessed to helping his uncle murder and burn a body. But it was a coerced confession, and his IQ is very low, and he was told if he just told the police what they wanted to hear, that he could go home to watch WrestleMania. It's a very sad situation. 6 days after the original confession, Peterson recanted. He claimed he confessed so that he could be sent to the state hospital and let out of jail. He remained adamant that the DNA evidence would not be a match. The police officers, of course, did not believe his recant and stated, quote, "I don't have an influence on the DNA. I believe it's going to come back you, but if it doesn't, you don't have a thing to worry about, do you?" Not long after the DNA profile from the vaginal swab came back, it excluded Peterson. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of DNA testing at the time, and the state's DNA expert was unable to create a full profile from the spot on the shirt. This convinced police that Peterson was still guilty and that he had simply worked with an accomplice, even though his confession never mentioned anyone else being included in the crime. Following the DNA exclusion, Peterson was yet again interrogated. During this interrogation, police lied to him and told him that the DNA proved he was involved in the crime, which is completely legal for police to lie. Over the next few weeks, Peterson met with the police multiple times. During these meetings, he would confess multiple times, just changing small details each time. Eventually, police convinced him to confess that he did it with an accomplice, and that the accomplice is the one who committed the vaginal rape while he only committed the oral rape, which, just for the record, contradicts their lie that the vaginal DNA matched him, but I digress. I think that speaks volumes about his mental capabilities and the fact that they knew they were taking advantage of him. Throughout his interviews with police, Peterson would name many accomplices, all of which would be cleared by the DNA. Thankfully, all of these interrogations were audio recorded. In those audio recordings, you can hear Peterson get multiple details of the crime wrong. First, he couldn't correctly identify the clothes that Geraldine was wearing. He originally stated she was wearing a dress, when in reality she was wearing a white top and pink pants. He also couldn't confirm where the sexual assault happened. All of the evidence showed it happened in her living room, but Peterson said it occurred in the bedroom. He also failed to describe the candle that he said he removed from the house, which was found in a tree close to the house. The only time Peterson could get details of the crime correct was when he was coached by police. Despite the issues with the confessions and the DNA evidence, the state moved forward and charged Jamie Lee Peterson with burglary, rape, and murder. Before going to trial, they locked Peterson into his final confession that he committed the crime with an accomplice that he did not know the identity of, and that he only committed the oral rape, whereas the unnamed, unknown accomplice committed the vaginal rape, thus explaining why there had been no match for the DNA and explaining Peterson was behind the small spot of semen on the shirt that was too small to be tested. That is the entire case that the state had going to trial. The trial lasted less than a month, and on December 14, 1998, Peterson was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I know I talked last week about how if I were on the Michael Peterson jury, I don't think I could have found him guilty. This one is far worse. Absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt. You have nothing. He confessed, but everything he confessed was proven wrong. You have DNA that excludes him, and then you have DNA that can't be tested. The fact that they got 12 people to agree that he was guilty and should be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole absolutely blows my mind. When I read that, my jaw was on the floor. That is unfathomable to me. Anyways, it should be stated that earlier that year, in April, Peterson pled guilty to that statutory rape charge that he was originally being held on. In August of 1997, he was sentenced to 9 to 15 years in prison for that case. So for the next decade and a half, every appeal would be filed on his behalf, and it was denied. In 2001, his attorney asked to have the small stain on the shirt tested, and that was denied. In May of 2013, Peterson's attorney, who by the way at this time was 92 years old, finally got a win. He convinced the Michigan Law School's Innocence Clinic to re-examine the case and test the DNA with new technology. The Michigan's Innocence Clinic, which I will be calling MIC, from here on out, successfully got the DNA entered into the national database, and wouldn't you know it, they got a hit. That DNA matched a young man by the name of Jason Ryan. Ryan was originally a suspect early on. He was 18 years old at the time of Geraldine's murder and had came to town to stay with a friend for a week before the crime. That friend lived about 2 blocks from Geraldine. In 1997, in an unrelated crime, Ryan was arrested during a home evasion in Flint, Michigan, which I did not plan this when I talked about doing the Petersons, but currently, as you were hearing this, I am maybe 20 minutes from Flint, Michigan, because that is where most of my dad's side of my family is from. So, anyways, Ryan was arrested on a home invasion in Flint, Michigan. He pleaded guilty and was put on probation and then returned to Kalkaska. Ryan was interviewed immediately following Geraldine's murder, but released. Then was brought in again to speak to police. He was completely cooperative with the police, even taking 2 polygraphs. He denied any knowledge of who Jamie Lee Peterson was and knowing anything about a rape or murder. Ryan also gave a DNA sample in those initial interviews that was never tested against the vaginal swab DNA. And I'm sorry, I'm interjecting my opinion again here, but this is starting to feel like lazy police work to me. I'm sorry, but it seems like they found someone who they knew they could put away for it. He had a low IQ. He was failing the polygraphs, which are not even admissible in court, remind you. And they just didn't care to do their actual jobs. I am very pro law enforcement when they do their job and they do it right, but these cops didn't. The small DNA spot on the shirt was matched to Jason Ryan. Despite this fact, police and state attorneys continued to fight against the release and exoneration of Jamie Lee Peterson. On December 2nd of 2014, Jason Ryan was arrested and charged with rape and murder. Unfortunately, it wasn't until August of 2015 that Peterson was granted a retrial and his convictions were overturned. In September of that same year, his charges were dropped and then he was released from prison after 17 years behind bars. Jason Ryan was convicted in September of 2015 to first-degree murder and first-degree sexual misconduct, and he was sentenced to mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. That same month, Jamie Lee Peterson filed 2 wrongful conviction lawsuits against the attorneys and Kalkaska police. Both were settled for a combined total of $1.1 million. And then in 2018, he was also awarded $246,100 from the state of Michigan. Peterson now lives in a halfway house. This case, first of all, that's a innocent Peterson, which is crazy, and not where I expected the case to go at all. Now, I don't want to say he's completely innocent because, as we learned, he was arrested and charged with statutory rape, and he pleaded guilty to it. The girl was 15, he was 22. I think probably mentally he was not 22, but regardless, you were 22, so you cannot be with a 15-year-old. I hope that that young lady got the mental health counseling and justice that she deserved. I do, however, think that in terms of the other case, police targeted him. They had nothing. Yeah, he failed the polygraphs, but as I said, those are not admissible in court. The DNA excluded him. He didn't know any details of the crime, the scene, the case, the victim. He told you himself that he admitted to it because he wanted to leave the jail and go to the hospital. Anyone who chooses to be locked up in a mental asylum again, that's what it would have been called in the 90s. In the 90s, anyone who would choose to be there in the 90s, I think that is a cry for help. And that's what he was doing. And instead, he was framed and prosecuted for something that he did not commit. Like I said, I think the police were lazy. They knew that he would be an easy target. They didn't want to put in the work to actually solve the case at hand, which is disrespectful to Geraldine as well, because she deserves her due justice. Her family deserves to know that her true killer is behind bars, not just this kid that you've decided will be easy to convict. I feel really bad for everyone involved, and I'm glad that they eventually got to the bottom of it. Now, I will be honest and say that I don't know about the 1.1 million and the nearly 250,000 from the state. I think that, well, I hope he has an executor over his funds, because again, someone with mental disabilities like that, I don't know that they can properly handle that much money, and that they would, make smart choices and things like that with it, or they could be taken advantage of by other people. So I hope that he at least had help. My thing with that is, yes, you were technically wrongly convicted on this one crime, but you pled guilty to committing this other crime, and regardless of the one you were framed for, you were sentenced to 9 to 15 years for the one you pled guilty for. And you served 17. So at most, you served 2 years more than you would have for the first crime anyways. So I think everybody dropped the ball in this case. The police dropped the ball. The district attorney or attorney general or whoever said yes, go forward with the case, they dropped the ball. The judge dropped the ball on hearing the case. The jury dropped the ball on convicting him with no evidence. And then I do think that the second jury and the state of Michigan dropped the ball again by paying him off with hush money. I think all around bad choices were made from everyone involved. The state, the attorneys, the lawyers, the police, the jury. It's just not a good situation, in my opinion. I think every single step of this case could have been handled better, and it just wasn't. So, that is the case of a halfway innocent Peterson, which we haven't had leading up to this in this series of Petersons. I have had so much fun covering all of the Peterson cases with you guys. I think in the future I'm going to do more months like this with a loose theme, because it's a lot of fun to research and sit down and talk about, and I think it's fun for you guys to know what to expect coming up. I've been playing around with the idea of putting out a calendar, a monthly calendar on socials. Let me know what you guys think about that. Do you want to have a heads up onto what I'm going to cover so that you can look into it and research it yourself? Do you prefer for you to just have a cold, dry run and I tell you the case and you can look it up after? You let me know. I am going to be doing I'm going to be doing a 4th of July based case, because next week's episode will come out on July 3rd, and so the next day is the 4th of July, which is super exciting. I do hope everyone has a fun and safe 4th of July. Please remember, if you drink, to drink responsibly. And I look forward to seeing you guys then. Oh, and before I forget, I know it says it in the closing, but I'm here asking again, please be sure to leave a rating and review. It helps the podcast get out to more people. Share with your friends, things like that. You guys know I hate promoting myself, but this is something that really does just help the podcast overall and helps me be able to keep making these for you. So please, wherever you listen, be sure to give a 5-star rating and review. See you next week. Bye!